I don't want people to hear me or us saying that anytime someone is offended, that it's a paper tiger, because that's not true. There are legitimate situations where people have experienced legitimate trauma. To do something that calls that trauma to the forefront and creates a legitimate mental, emotional, physiological reaction is very unfortunate and something that should be avoided at all cost. If you know that it's coming and you can tell somebody about it, then great. Then they can avoid that. And if there's something in a course description that lets somebody know, hey, we're going to cover a book in here that deals with rape or molestation or home invasion or something that hits really close to home, then by all means,
Opt out.
give the person the opportunity to say, I want to avoid that. And if someone is in a situation where they have been traumatized in a legitimate way, and we can provide a healing, nurturing, safe environment for them, we should do that in the educational environment. But there has to be some kind of threshold. If you're so hypersensitive, so fragile that virtually anything a professor says, they're so paranoid that somebody in the class is going to be headed over to the dean's office after class by something they said in an approved curriculum, and it's going to get traction, then we've got the tail wagging the dog. It seems to me the first step that I would have advocated in some of these situations is if the student came in and said, I found this to be offensive, then make your case. And clearly, if it's blatant bigotry, if there's some, it doesn't have to be racial, whatever it might be, then look at it. If it's a pattern of behavior, then you deal with it. If it's not, then you try to have the two resolve their differences. Is this your intention? Figure it out. Hopefully, the two can resolve the situation. That's part of the maturity of the student having a difference. Now, understand there's a difference in power between the student, and if they're making an anonymous complaint and they don't want to face the teacher and fear for their grade or whatever, I understand that. But to the extent that the student can resolve these things themselves, they need to do that. They need to own that. If it's a situation where there's a power imbalance, I get it, but they need to be held accountable for what's the real issue. You just can't put something in the complaint box and walk away. You've got to stand for the complaint. You've got to give a rationale for it. And there's got to be more to it than just, I was offended, Bob student.
And you may or may not get your way as a result. I mean, it might not go your way, and then you have to deal with that.
As I've said, if it's a legitimate thing, then certainly accommodations can be made. But we need to prepare these students for the real world. Psychology says they need to be tough enough to learn to cope with and accommodate to things in life that they're not going to like. They're not going to like everything. Everybody's not going to get a trophy. And that's not going to make everybody happy, but
they're not happy anyway.
They're not happy anyway.
Yeah.
Now, is there a point that you believe we should start teaching these kids how to cope with anxiety, depression, stress, cyberbullying, these issues as part of the curriculum in school?
Definitely. I mean, I think, cognitive behavioral therapy, even though I practice from an eclectic, point of view, I believe that cognitive behavioral therapy is the most researched therapy. It's probably the easiest to understand and to put into practice because it's very, systematic in terms of how it works. But to change your thinking about something and not just act on your feeling, but to actually check it, make sure that it's not distorted in some way, hear what some other, possibilities are, and start to really look at, is this just me and the way that I feel? Is this something that, like you said, is something that needs to be pursued and dealt with? And I think that we just need to teach our children how to gain skills to cope with adversity, prejudice, bullying, all of these things, being offended, and that it doesn't make it right, but it teaches them how to cope with it, whether that's making the complaint or whether that's dealing with it, onto themselves or whether it's addressing it or whatever it is. I think to give them some skills other than just call somebody out on social media and try to get them canceled.
Cognitive behavioral therapy, to me, seems like a very understandable intervention, short-term intervention strategy that will work with kids at virtually any age.
I agree. It also identifies, if you have it out there in the schools, it identifies for teachers and administrators what the problems are, right? Because so much of this is in secret and without their knowledge. And so kids want to vent, they want to talk about things. And I know when I was a social worker in school, in a school setting, public school, um, I would have, you know, a lot of kids come to my office and have lunch with me, and we would just sit and chat, and I would find out a lot in that hour lunch period about what was going on, and then but I was only one person, and I was a social worker at the time and a minority in the school, and, you know, they don't wanna hear the problems, they don't really want to hear it. So I think if universally we did this in schools and it was just part of the curriculum, that would be amazing.
Yeah, if they can just teach kids just some of the basic tenets of cognitive behavior therapy, how to reframe their internal dialogue. Don't assume you can read the minds of the person that you're dealing with. Don't assume that you can predict the future. Don't catastrophize. Don't label. Don't discount positives about yourself. Learn to accept compliments from other people. Stop negative filtering. All of these things, and teach them the 4 criteria for a rational thought so they can test their thinking if they don't have the wherewithal to go talk to somebody. All the different things can make a huge difference.
And we don't know when our thoughts are distorted either.
No,
So
not unless you
unless
test
we
them.
Yeah, exactly.
Get them, if nothing else, to stop playing the what if game
Mm.
and realize, let's live in the moment and get through. There are so many important things they can teach them. I think if we would start doing some of these things instead of coddling these kids, I think we would have a much better chance of preparing them for life and them succeeding. But that's not going to happen unless you put money and time behind it. And they did some of that in the last reauthorization after we had the hearings, but that was at elementary and secondary level. We'll see how much difference it makes. But now the pendulum seems to have swung the other way. So we're not here to discount anybody's experience in any way, in anything. There are legitimate traumas, no question about it. We're not saying that. There are triggers that people can walk right into and have a genuine bad response. We're just saying that trigger's gotten to be a hair trigger. And real trauma is being lost in hypersensitivity with so many things that are being labeled as traumatic that really don't qualify as trauma. And if everybody can complain about anything that makes them even moderately uncomfortable, rather than learning to deal with that discomfort so they can take it in stride, they're going to have a rough ride when they get out of college. And college should prepare people to deal with the real world.